So please join me in welcoming Greg Hansard.
Thank you. Let me get my mic going here. We already did a mic check. Okay, mic check. Now
Are you turned on?
yes, there we go. All right. Thank you, Peggy, for that kind introduction. It's really great to be back here at the MacArthur Memorial and also presenting for the Norfolk Historical Society. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about my new book. Is the microphone working okay for everyone? Okay, excellent. And the MacArthur Memorial and also the Norfolk Historical Society hold a special place in my heart because this is the first place where I presented on the topic. In 2013, Peggy contacted me to see if I'd be interested, willing to give a presentation on the story of the Ss Kwanzaa. I don't know if many folks in here are familiar with that story, but it was a Portuguese passenger liner that carried refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe in 1940. And while I was at the Virginia Historical Society, I had produced a video on the Kwanzaa and its journey to New York City, Veracruz, and eventually to Norfolk. And when Peggy asked me to talk about the Kwanzaa, I told her that I wasn't sure if I could talk for 45 minutes about that topic, but I told her that I recently completed my thesis on the internment of German sailors in Hampton Roads. And I said I'd be more than happy to talk about that topic. So in 2013, in this building, I gave my first presentation on the story of 800 German sailors who were interned in Hampton Roads during World War I. So now we fast forward, right, 5 years later, and after a significant amount of research and writing, I'm back to talk to you not about my thesis, but about my new book, German Sailors in Hampton Roads, a World War I story at the Norfolk Navy Yard. But before I begin sharing with you some of the highlights of this narrative, I want to tell you a little bit about how I discovered the topic. From 2008 to 2011, I served as an assistant editor for the Virginia Historical Society's scholarly journal and also their members' newsletter. And one of my favorite jobs was not fact-checking the articles or indexing an issue of the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography, as much fun as that may sound. It was actually trying to hunt down a mystery photograph for our members' newsletter, because we'd send out our members' newsletter, and on the back of that newsletter you'd have a photograph, and our members would have to identify the scene. And one day I was searching through the postcard collection, trying to find something that would stump our readers, and I came across this image of some jovial German sailors on board a ship in Newport News. And I was excited. I thought I had found an image to fool our readers. And my next test was to go check with our curator of prints and photographs, because I thought if I could stump him, then I could surely fool all of our readers. So I proudly entered his office. And so I approached our curator of prints and photographs and asked him to identify the scene. And he quickly said, well, that's the German sailors who built the tiny village in Hampton Roads during World War I. But that was all he could tell me. And I was disappointed at first that I couldn't use this image for our mystery photo. I have to go back to the drawing board. But I was intrigued at the story. He couldn't tell me any more about these German sailors. And I wanted to know more. And I was also looking for a thesis topic at that time to complete my master's. So this led me down a path at the National Archives where I discovered 18 months of correspondence between the German captains and the U.S. government, along with manuscripts that range from Pabst Blue Ribbon beer receipts to detailed descriptions of missing sailors who had escaped even drawings of their tattoos. We can see this piece of correspondence from one of the German captains with a very, very detailed description of one of the missing sailors. And I went through almost 2 years of newspaper coverage from the Virginian Pilot and the Norfolk Landmark. And this gave me a clear picture of the German sailors' activities according to the local community. And I also tracked down rare photographs and postcards from various archives throughout the United States, including the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard Museum, the Hampton Roads Naval Museum, and the Norfolk Public Library, thanks to Peggy and her staff over there. And these photographs and postcards showcase the village that the sailors built, their ships, and their interactions with American citizens. And all of these wonderful sources provided the evidence to tell the story of 800 German sailors' internment in a Virginia maritime community during World War I. And that's the story that I'm going to share with you today. On March 25th, 1915, the propellers of the Prince Idle Friedrich turned for over an hour as Captain Max Tierschens debated when he'd make his daring dash back out to sea. "You may miss me at any time," the young German naval officer explained to hundreds of eager visitors who had come to catch a glimpse of the famous German raider that had sunk 11 ships during its 7-month voyage from Tsingtao, China, all the way to Virginia. And the raider that once wrought havoc on merchant ships now sat in Newport News, a neutral port on the Virginia coast, awaiting fuel and repairs before it could depart again. And Tierschens expressed his feelings about leaving to the crowd. "I hate to go," he explained, "but duty comes first of all, and besides, we all have our mission to fill." Spoken like a true German captain right there. The headlines of the local paper, the Virginian Pilot, greeted readers with a bit of surprise the following morning. The paper exclaimed that with the German cruiser apparently making preparations to sail, and with 3 foreign warships off the Virginia Capes, Hampton Roads took on a real warlike appearance when the entire garrison, Fortress Monroe and Fort Wool, were called to quarters. Now we can imagine, getting your paper, the Virginian Pilot, and reading the headlines that your city has taken on the appearance of a war-like appearance. That would shock us, and it shocked the community at this time. This episode startled the maritime community and was the beginning of the entire country's focus on the sprint of the cruiser back out to sea. Even the Richmond Times-Dispatch called the presence of the Idle on the Virginia coast one of the most important events that had occurred on North American soil during World War I. Now, it's important to understand this is 2 years before the United States entered the war, right? But that's still a bold claim that shows the significance of the event to not only Virginia, but the nation. And as the raider and its crew of 400 prepared for their dash back out to sea, there was another issue concerning one of the Idle's victims, the William P. Fry. When Germany entered World War I in the summer of 1914, the Idle was among several other merchant ships and passenger liners that the German Navy transformed into armed surface raiders. They were now outfitted with guns and supplies, given a full crew, in order to sink any vessels carrying contraband to the Allies. And on January 27, 1915, the Idle intercepted the William P. Fry, an American merchant ship. After boarding the Fry, Captain Tierschens found the wheat cargo to be contraband, and the next day he decided to sink the ship. So when the Idle entered U.S. waters, she had 25 members of the Fry's crew on board, including the captain of the vessel, Captain King, and his wife, and also their 2 children, which are pictured here on board the Idle soon after they entered Newport News with the German sailors. Seem to be making some pretty good relationships with these German sailors. And so think about that for a moment. You have a belligerent, a nation at war, who has just sunk, destroyed a neutral U.S. merchant ship, and now that belligerent is seeking refuge in a U.S. port. And as the idol enters the U.S. port, it carries U.S. prisoners on board. And I have an entire chapter dedicated to the case of the William P. Fry. It's a remarkable story that many people are unaware of. And despite the complications of the Fry and the lurking Allied ships, the German captain made it clear that once he arrived in Hampton Roads, he was not intent on staying. It's also important to understand that international law stated that a belligerent could have 24 hours to refuel and get repairs, and then they must leave port or intern. The idea is that you can't use a neutral port to outfit your ship for war. And the United States gives the idol several extensions beyond that 24 hours. And the German captain, pictured here, continued to threaten to leave. Tierschens is in the center there. And he continued to threaten to leave until the United States had enough. You can clearly see what the German captain's doing. He's trying to keep the Allied ships off the Virginia coast occupied. He's playing sort of a cat and mouse game with them. And the U.S. was tired of it. And they had to hold up shipping during this time period to ensure that there were really no violations of neutrality. And on April 7th, the U.S. government sent orders to Tierschens that they must depart by 4 a.m. the following day or otherwise accept internment. The U.S. government awaited Tierschen's response. April 8th was a gloomy day for the German captain. The letter he was about to submit was going to seal the fate of his ship and crew. He would be interned, stuck in the United States until the end of the war. And Tierschen's letter was straightforward. I inform you, I intend to intern the Prince Idol Frederick. The main reason, he said, was because they stood little chance of making it safely through the lurking enemy cruisers. And as the crew of the Idol prepared for their transfer from Newport News to the Norfolk Navy Yard in Portsmouth, another situation was developing a few miles off the Virginia coast. Another German raider, the Crown Prince Wilhelm, was about to attempt a similar dash through the Virginia Capes to seek refuge alongside the Idol. With less than 25 tons of coal left in the ship's bunkers, and a crew sickened with berry, Commander Paul Tierfelder, another T captain that we'll talk about today, captain of the Crown Prince, knew his only choice was to steam past British and French ships to safety in Hampton Roads. It was April 10th, 1915, and his crew had been at sea for over 251 days without seeing a port. And this was one of the main reasons why so many crew members had berry, right? They hadn't been adequately restocking their food supply, and many sailors suffered from a lack of essential vitamins. And as the Crown Prince began its sprint, an excited officer aboard the ship, Count Alfred von Niezikowski, caught a glimpse of the lights on the Virginia coast. These lights, according to Niezikowski, were the first sign of shore I had seen in many days. They were so welcome, they seemed like home. And he believed that behind those lights was a haven of safety, a great nation, friendly to both sides in the war, and now our sole hope of protection. I use this quote at the beginning of the book because I think it sums up how many of these men felt after being at sea for so many days. They really viewed those lights on the Virginia shore as a haven of safety. And I think it's also a sign of the relationships that would form between these German sailors and the community. And as the Crown Prince moved closer to the Virginia shore, they spotted 2 British ships straight ahead. They inched closer and closer, hoping that they wouldn't be spotted. And a few moments later, they made it through. They were safe. The crew celebrated. Some danced, recalled Niezikowski, and some turned somersaults. I love this vivid description. He even goes on to say they all acted as if they were possessed. You can just see the jubilation from these men. But Niezikowski, along with several of the crew members, knew that they would be interned, and many believed that it sufficed, that the ship was safe, had not been beaten at sea. They had not been captured. The ship that had destroyed 14 merchant ships now sought refuge in a neutral harbor, the same port that held their sister ship, the Idol. The next morning, as they neared the Virginia coast, an American ship came to their side and delivered 2 officers to pilot the German cruiser into the harbor. The next few weeks in Newport News for the Crown Prince were similar to when the Idol had attempted to make its journey back out to sea. Tierfelder was just as brash as Tierschens, just as easily and quietly as I slipped into this port. "I'm going out," remarked the captain. But many, including the U.S. government and the German sailors, knew their time was up. They had more than 60 sick crew members and a battered ship. They had to intern. On May 3rd, 1915, the Crown Prince and its crew were transferred from Newport News to the Norfolk Navy Yard in Portsmouth. This would be the permanent place of internment for both German cruisers. These German sailors would remain in the U.S. until the end of the war. The Idol and the Crown Prince's daring adventures on the high seas were over, but a new adventure would begin with their internment. And this is what my book really focuses on, the relationships that were formed between the community and these German sailors, and also the benefits that Portsmouth and Norfolk had as a result of the sailors' presence. I have an entire chapter that focuses on the economic benefits for Norfolk and Portsmouth as a result of the presence of these German sailors and their ships. And during the 18 months of internment, the sailors purchased goods from local stores, ranging from sheet music for the band and Christmas supplies to sporting goods and cooking supplies. They requested passes to go to the dentist, the hospital, and the laundry. And as you've seen earlier, one of their regular purchases was their bi-monthly shipment of kegs of Pabst Blue Ribbon from the local Norfolk branch. And when I was going through correspondence at the National Archives, you'd get through every few pieces of correspondence and you'd see a receipt like this for Pabst. So they were obviously pretty happy while they were here. As a result of the purchase of goods and services in the area, and also the tourism that they generated, the local Chamber of Commerce obviously wanted to keep the sailors in Hampton Roads. You have 800 new residents, and more importantly, you have people who want to see them. So this brings tourism to the area. When Mayor of Norfolk, this is a shot of the Navy Yard here, when Mayor of Norfolk, Wyndham R. Mayo, and the President of the Chamber of Commerce, Barton Myers, heard rumors that the ships might be moved out to Philadelphia, they left for Washington immediately to meet with Secretary of the Navy, Joseph Daniels. Their objective was to make sure that he wasn't going to move these ships. And the United States reason for wanting to move the ships was to free up space for the expansion of the Navy Yard in Portsmouth, which will obviously happen a few years down the road. Mayo and Myers argued that there was more than enough space for these ships, and if they moved them, it would be a heavy blow to the local community. And again, of course, they want to keep these ships in their backyard because the ship's presence is making them money. And on May 1st, Secretary Daniels made the decision to keep the ships at the Norfolk Navy Yard. Now, local companies also took advantage of the potential tourist destination, the tourist attraction. And boating companies offered sightseeing tours of the vessels as soon as they entered Hampton Roads. This is an image of the crew of the Idol soon after it enters into Newport News. On March 15th, only a few days after the Idol arrived, an advertisement in the Virginian Pilot announced that the steamer Clio of the Norfolk Steamboat Company will make a special trip to Newport News to view the German ship Prince Idol Friedrich. And there were several charters that left Norfolk and other areas to take curious passengers to view the ships. And these two images are from the Library of Congress, again, showed German sailors aboard the Idol. And interest in the German ships was far greater than the U.S. ships, and newspaper advertisements placed the German cruisers ahead of advertisements for U.S. ships. On March 21st, big letters at the bottom of the Virginian Pilot exclaimed, "See the German cruiser Prince Idol Friedrich today." And also, the USS Pennsylvania just launched. So you get this idea, the Idol is listed as the main attraction, while the USS Pennsylvania is almost an afterthought. So the paper and the boating companies are catering to the public's interest. The novelty of these foreign raiders trump the newly launched American battleship. And remember, the Idol sank an American merchant ship. Tourism also increased not only because of the presence of the German sailors, but because of a new attraction that they built, the German village. Now, I love coming back to Portsmouth and Norfolk and telling the story because there's so many people that have heard about the German village. When I go other places, we don't even get to that starting point. So it's great to come back. This is the story that most people have heard about, the German village. In the fall of 1915, the crews began creating the village out of scraps of glass, lumber, and other materials. And it eventually included more than 50 colorfully painted miniature buildings, and it became one of the major tourist destinations on the East Coast. More than 1,000 visitors toured the small replica village one day in 1916. The village was named Idol Wilhelm after the two ships, and its buildings consisted of a church, a newspaper office, a telegraph station, a postmaster station, fire department, police station, and several other little villas. They even had a gymnasium, bowling alleys, and my favorite, a baseball field. And the buildings were decorated with sunflower and hollyhock gardens, and they had red roofs, white carvings along the eaves and fence posts. And the villas were named after the German ships, including the Emden, which equipped the Idol, the Karlsruhe, which equipped the Crown Prince and was also the ship where Tierfelder had served as an engineer, and also the Lux, which was a gunboat that Tierschens had commanded and the former ship of many of the sailors. And tourists flocked to the village to experience German culture and craftsmanship. Sailors performed acrobatic shows, they sang songs and gave concerts. You can think of Disneyland in 1915, right? There are a couple of photos that the Mariners Museum has, and they show hundreds of tourists in the Navy Yard. And it looks like a scene from a carnival. Vendors are selling toys, there's food, there's games being played. There were tiny lakes, gardens, and farms. One visitor remarked of the spectacle of the village, calling it an atmosphere of Kaiser and culture and Wiener Schnitzel and good, sturdy Lutheranism. Everything one could find in a hard-working German town of the old country. I think that's one of my favorite quotes. It's Disneyland, but with Kaiser and culture, Wiener Schnitzel, and of course Lutheranism, right? And who wouldn't want to pay admission for that? We get this really vivid picture. But the village was not only for tourists. The main reason it was built was to create a sense of the fatherland for the crews of the Idol and the Crown Prince. To continue their sense of patriotism, they planted flowers in the rose garden to form a shape similar to an iron cross. And the garden provided a source of cucumbers, tomatoes, radishes, and other vegetables. Their farm also included some of the animals that they had acquired on their voyage to the Virginia shores, along with new ones that they purchased while staying in Hampton Roads. Many of the photos of the German sailors that I came across include crew members smoking in most of the photos, And then there's also several images that have crew members with animals, and there's even images that have both, German sailors smoking and holding animals. I managed to get that picture on the cover of the book, so if you see the cover of the book, there's sailors smoking cigarettes, mingling with locals, and holding baby pigs. So there's kind of these interesting shots. One of the only signs in English was located on the road next to the farm. Warning, go slow. Be careful of chickens, pigeons, and ducks. And these agriculture areas provided sources of food and created a home-like atmosphere. But they couldn't replicate home life exactly. When asked about the village, the owner of one of the villas explained, not all perfect. 9. Wo, where is die Mutter? Where is the Gretchen? He asked. Their new home lacked a woman, a mother, a wife, and a daughter. They could try to recreate the fatherland structurally, but they could not recreate their household. And since they couldn't see their loved ones, they thought of new ways to help the women and children back home. All entry fees to the village were donated to the German Red Cross to help the families of soldiers and sailors. They found other ways to make money for the charity by selling souvenirs, postcards, children's toys, and their paper, the Colony Anzeiger. There are a few copies of their newspaper that they published every Saturday. The Portsmouth Naval Shipyard Museum has a copy, and also the German Society of Pennsylvania has a copy too, and a few other archives, but they're pretty rare. Their weekly paper included events and happenings around the Navy Yard, and it also reported on the war news abroad and attempted to debunk a lot of the British propaganda that was being printed. Visitors also had the opportunity to tour the ships. On a tour through the ships, visitors could get a beer and a sandwich at the Ratskeller for a few cents. And on one Sunday in May of 1915, a local preacher wanted to investigate the selling of beer on the cruiser. This is by far my favorite story that I came across in my research. Reverend J.L. Westfall of South Street Baptist Church in Norfolk visited the Wilhelm on May 23rd, and he observed the sale of beer to several American citizens, including himself. And Westfall then formed a committee with other preachers in the area, and they were going to draft a letter to Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, concerning the illegal sale of beer on Sunday. And Westfall reported that during his time on the cruiser, he tasted the beverage to satisfy himself it was beer, of course. Then he even goes further. He also reports that his party purchased 6 rounds total, and reported that there were about 100 persons about them. So I would imagine by the 5th or 6th round, their judgment would start to become a little cloudy. He preached to his congregation the next Sunday against the sale of beer on Sunday. He involved the local police, but they could do little because the beer was sold on a foreign ship. Now, when I first heard this account, I thought to myself, well, like the Secretary of the Navy really cares about alcohol on a naval vessel, right? And, I was presenting at a World War I conference, and some Navy historians quickly pointed out, well, Secretary of Navy Josephus Daniels is the one who removes alcohol on U.S. Navy ships, and so he may have really been interested on that. But as a compromise, as I mentioned, the German captains agreed not to sell beer to visitors on Sunday. During internment, the sailors found activities to pass the time. Many of these activities and events were part of American culture. The sailors observed American sporting and military events and participated in religious services alongside American citizens. And the intern sailors really had a full social life. They were introduced to America's pastime, baseball. And on April 23rd, 1915, several of the German sailors went to the opening game of the Virginia Baseball League. The contest featured Norfolk against Portsmouth, so that's a nice rivalry, isn't it? And it was a pitcher's duel, ending with Norfolk winning 2-0. Lots of cheers from the audience. And the sailors continued to go to games during their stay, and even created a baseball field in the Navy Yard. And they started playing games there. And this part of the sailors' connection to baseball is very intriguing to me, because as Peggy mentioned in the introduction, I had the opportunity to play professional baseball in Germany. Now, again, it's not the American and National League that we have here, but it exists, and it's improving. It's becoming more popular. But I think it'd be great to connect these sailors, the crews of the Idol and the Crown Prince, to the beginning of baseball Bundesliga in Germany. The sailors regularly attended religious and holiday services at churches in Hampton Roads. On May 3rd, 1915, more than 500 people attended Sunday school at Monumental Church in Portsmouth, including members of the German ships. The paper reported that it was the largest number of the year that had received the Holy Communion. And the German sailors' Christmas activities for 1915 included religious services, dinner parties, and one of the German officers, Chief Engineer Mueller, met with a clergyman from St. Paul's Catholic Church in Portsmouth about Christmas Mass. And then a week later, Secretary Daniels granted the German sailors leave to go ashore and celebrate the holy day. This is on Christmas morning, and we see 255 sailors march to the church from the Navy Yard, accompanied by U.S. escorts. They sat in pews alongside U.S. sailors. And when Mass concluded, the U.S. military escorted the interned sailors out of the church and back to the Navy Yard. And the German sailors also threw a great New Year's Eve party. The party was very well attended, and even the famous Baltimore Sun newspaper editor H.L. Mencken attended the festivities. Mencken greatly enjoyed the sailors' party and recalled a few important moments during the evening. One was that the commandant of the Navy Yard's wife, so this is Commandant the Navy Yard McLean's wife, Elsie, was pregnant. And the German captain, Captain Tierschens, offered a toast to her and also the newcomer, greatly to her delight. And the second was that Niesiekowski, the German officer, had to cut off the beer supply because he believed the men had a lower tolerance for alcohol than the Navy sailors abroad. No Navy veterans out there to attest to that. But from the correspondence and from the accounts, it really appears that the party was getting out of hand. And Mencken himself may have had too great of a time, because on his return trip the next morning, he recalls, "I was so much used up that I slept all the way home." The German sailors found activities, baseball, boating, swimming, religious services, and parties to keep them busy during internment. But most of them longed to go back home. They longed to be with their families. And these feelings are what led to the main problem of internment for the United States government: escapes. Despite the large amount of liberty they were given, they were still not free. And the lack of freedom created escapes. And one in particular caused a great stir. On the morning of October 10th, 1915, 6 interned sailors left the Navy Yard dressed in civilian clothes, and they embarked on a yacht, slipping past guards off the coast of Cape Henry. The sailors had bought the yacht, Eclipse, from a local architect, and they worked on the yacht for a month, equipped it with new sails and several coats of paint. They even made the engine twice the horsepower. They had become regulars at the local yacht club. They had even been out several times, but they had always returned. Now, we can see what's going on, right? It seems pretty obvious to us, but somehow this went undetected. And the flight of the Eclipse sparked several rumors to its whereabouts. One rumor claimed that the boat had somehow been equipped with guns off the coast of Florida and joined up with a raiding party to sink British and French ships. We can envision this 60-foot yacht trying to take on some massive British and French cruisers off the coast of Florida. Probably didn't happen, right? Another rumor claimed that the sailors joined a Swedish steamer off Texas and then went to Cuba or Mexico. 2 bottles came to the Virginia beaches with messages supposedly from the Eclipse. The first message claimed, "On board yacht Eclipse, 90 miles off Hatteras, in howling gale, no water, no gasoline, everyone exhausted." The next message was found off Ocean View by Clark Wheaton of Chicago. He was walking on the beach and came across a champagne bottle that contained the message, "We are sailing for Germany on yacht Eclipse from 6 of the German ship lying in the U.S. Navy Yard." The commandant of the Navy Yard believed the rumors to be false and said that they were either picked up by the British or drowned at sea. And the crew of the Eclipse never turned up. And the commandant was probably right. The saga of the Eclipse, along with the escape of several other sailors, forced Washington to take measures to ensure that this wouldn't happen again. Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels wrote to the commandant of the Navy Yard, saying to either increase guard or take any other necessary measures to make future escape of German personnel impossible. Daniels made it clear that future escapes could not be excused. And after almost 7 months of watching the German sailors, Rear Admiral Frank Beatty retired from his post as commandant of the Norfolk Navy Yard. During the German sailors' internment, we see that there are 2 commandants of the Navy Yard. For the first 7 months, it's going to be Rear Admiral Frank Beatty and then Walter McLean. And Rear Admiral Walter McLean took over Beatty's position in the end of November 1915, during the height of the escapes. And McLean would watch the sailors for the remainder of the internment at the Navy Yard. And he would form special bonds with the German sailors that would last well after the war was over. The problems with escapes and passes were always an issue for the U.S. government. They wanted to allow the German sailors some freedom, but they didn't want them to escape. Escapes caused negative press for the United States government and the Navy Yard. And no matter what freedoms and liberties were given to the German sailors, they were never truly free. They could not fight for their country, and they couldn't go back home. On September 29, 1916, U.S. authorities moved the German sailors and their ships to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And naval officials decided in the summer of 1916 that the Norfolk Navy Yard would be expanded. That was a discussion that they had earlier. And this meant that the sailors would have to tear down their village. It took them almost 6 months to create. And after the village was torn down, the community made it clear that the village would be missed. The German village at the Navy Yard is no more, and the whole South is suffer thereby, explained one article in Popular Science. I think this statement is obviously a bit over the top and romanticized, but I think it shows that there were strong feelings from the local community for these German sailors. Remember, this is before the United States enters the war. The German sailors' time in Philadelphia was short and not as lenient as in Hampton Roads, as increasing strains on German-American relations continued as a result of World War I. By the end of 1916, skepticism about German immigrants and intern sailors began to spread after there were incidents in the Northeast where German aliens sabotaged U.S. property. The mayor of Philadelphia, Thomas Smith, expressed his trepidations about keeping the crew members of the Idol and Crown Prince in his city. They might all escape and seize the Navy Yard. At the very least, they're all spying against America. So a little different opinion there in Philadelphia. To alleviate the concerns over protecting the German sailors' safety and U.S. property, Washington decided to move the sailors south to a more secluded area, away from ocean access at Fort Oglethorpe and Fort McPherson in Georgia. Their new homes featured greater isolation from civilian populations. They were isolated from water access, and the U.S. government and Army provided stronger security. On April 6, 1917, after a series of disputes with Germany over unrestricted submarine warfare, the U.S. entered World War I against the German Empire. That same day, the collector of Port of Philadelphia seized the intern cruisers. The Crown Prince Wilhelm was eventually renamed the USS von Steuben, so that's at the top. And the Prince Idle Friedrich at the bottom is renamed the USS de Kalb, and both served as troop ships for the United States during World War I. And I think it's interesting and also a compliment to the German sailors that both of the ships were renamed after Revolutionary War officers who had ties to Germany, Baron Johann de Kalb and Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben. The crew members of the surface raiders now officially became prisoners of war. Their freedom of movement and liberties were stripped from them, and the sailors' 2 years of confinement to prison barracks in Georgia was dull compared to their experience in Hampton Roads. The German POWs were eventually released in 1919, a few months after the end of the war. Most went back home to Europe, but some sailors, like Count Alfred von Niezikowski, enjoyed his stay so much that he decided to make the United States his permanent home. The former German naval officer from the Crown Prince became a U.S. citizen in 1926 and married Miss Nanine Ullman of Baltimore the following year. And Niezikowski's choice for his best man at his wedding may have surprised many because of the past strains on German-American relations since U.S. entry into World War I. But to others who knew about the internment, it may not have been such a shock. His best man, pictured here, was retired U.S. Navy officer Rear Admiral Walter McLean, the former commandant of the Norfolk Navy Yard, who had watched Niezikowski along with the rest of the 800 German sailors in Hampton Roads. 2 years after his wedding in 1929, Niezikowski published a book on his experience aboard the Crown Prince. In the foreword of his book, his best man, Walter McLean, an overseer of the German sailors, explained that the Wilhelm was a friendly visitor, and Count von Niezikowski became my guest. Positive relationships like Niezikowski and McLean's echoed throughout their internment. And these bonds are what made the internment of the Prince Idle Friedrich and the Crown Prince Wilhelm so unique. But it was Niezikowski's conclusion, not the foreword of his book, that made me realize there was a great story behind that postcard that I found in the stacks of the Virginia Historical Society. He said, "The events of our internment were as interesting to me as those of the cruise." I believe Niezikowski was right, and now I hope you do too. Thank you.